India and New Zealand have kick-started trade talks again after 10 years. Which way are they going, and how is this visit of the New Zealand Prime Minister to India build on ties between India and New Zealand in the years to come? Joining us to talk about this all is New Zealand's Minister for Trade, Investment, Agriculture and Forestry, Todd McLeay. Minister, thank you so much for joining us here on the program. Give us a sense of the takeaways from this big delegation that has been led by the New Zealand Prime Minister to India.
Well, we're very excited to be here, and of course for our Prime Minister, Chris Luxon, to receive a personal invitation from Prime Minister Modi makes it a very special occasion. This is our largest visiting delegation anywhere ever in the world. We've come to India, and it's very diverse, of course, from our business community to New Zealand culture and Māori, to some sports people, some of our very best cricketers, and of course we have a very large contingent from the Indian and New Zealand business and community more broadly. And it's because our government has said our relationship with India is a priority for us. So over the last 15 months since we established the government, we've been pulling out all the stops to demonstrate, that we're putting a lot of effort in. And it's so pleasing this week to see India reciprocating. We are two nations that are very close historically. It's 100 years since our first sporting contact. We have reasonable levels of trade. Our largest city in New Zealand, 11% of its population is Indian, people from India who have chosen New Zealand as their home, and we're very, very keen to continue to grow that relationship broadly and, of course, including in the area of trade.
Both countries have decided to relaunch trade negotiations. Give us a sense of what's the ambition this time around. Currently, the two-way trade between the two countries is around $2 billion. What's the ambition on the table?
That's right, and we know that it can grow exponentially much more quickly than that, but we need a common set of good rules that the business community in India and New Zealand can rely upon so they have certainty. New Zealand's quite a low tariff jurisdiction already, although it's hard to get goods and services between New Zealand and India, and I think that's some of the reason why the scale of our trade is quite modest. We have said we want a comprehensive free trade agreement. That's the agreement between the two governments. Minister Goyal and I have met many times over the last 14 months. This is my fifth visit to India. He and I have met 8 or 9 times in India and around the world, so we're ambitious. We want it to be comprehensive. It must be balanced and fair for both Indian businesses and citizens as well as New Zealand, and our two Prime Ministers yesterday when they met have encouraged us to get on with the job and do a high quality deal that's good for the two countries as quickly as possible.
Which are the areas where you definitely want more market access in India?
Well, there's a number of areas, most certainly. Some of that is around the primary sector. But if I take wood as an example, we had traditionally have exported logs from New Zealand to India. There were some restrictions put in place because of changes we made on our side about the way that we fumigate the logs, and we constructively have found a solution to that. But there are businesses in New Zealand who export logs here, or they add value to the logs in New Zealand and want to send the finished product up. I've spoken to many of them. Some of them are on the delegation this week, and instead of doing the processing in New Zealand, they either want to partner in India or build new wood processing facilities here to send the logs up and to process them in India, and then, as I said, for the Indian market or to sell to other parts of the world. And so I think you'll see a two-way exchange of investment and businesses cooperating and working together. But to answer your question, there are many areas that the New Zealand economy has diversified that we think we can do more in India, and we think also there are some very key areas that, in partnership we can grow very, very well back down in New Zealand.
Right. Now, when you speak about agriculture and dairy, how important would it be for India to open up these sectors to New Zealand goods?
Well, look, I think dairy is important to both countries, but we've said we're not going to talk about the detail during the negotiation. But there are a lot of complementarity in what we do. We know that our farmers are some of the most innovative in the world. They produce a very high quality, safe product, and it is demanded around the world. We have a very diverse trade relationship. We have trade agreements with 80 parts of the world and so on. One of the things we've agreed to, and Prime Minister Modi raised it in his media statement alongside Prime Minister Luxon yesterday, is areas that we can cooperate, and he's talking about in the areas of horticulture or in dairy, the expertise that exists in New Zealand, the science, the innovation, and how we can bring that to India to help grow the income of Indian farmers across the board, including in dairy. That was a commitment that my Prime Minister has given to Prime Minister Modi, and we'll be working on that. And so there'll be lots of opportunities to talk about that, but anything we do should be complementary and it should be in partnership, and there will well be across the board areas where Indian business might want some products from New Zealand to add to Indian products to then be able to sell to the world. That's the type of partnership we're looking for.
Right. Mobility of services, that is also we're discussing. When it comes to your existing agreements, such as those with Australia and China, what kind of a mobility services agreement as part of the FTA can we expect, or can New Zealand offer to India?
Well, in all of our agreements, we have rights of establishment for businesses to come down and set up there, and the key personnel to be able to come more easily and get visas to be stationed there or to come in and out. And so we'll look at all of those sorts of things. One of the things we've agreed to do is look at the agreements that India has with others and New Zealand has with other countries, and see what we've already done previously elsewhere and how that could be matched and be beneficial in our trade agreement. And so our officials will work through that. But there will be opportunities. We as I said, we have a large and growing Indian population in New Zealand. Our third largest ethnic group in New Zealand is now Indian. About half of the Indians that live in New Zealand were born in India. The others were born in New Zealand, but they continue to have very close ties to India. So that relationship is growing through people to people. We're just signalling that we want it also to grow and to prosper government to government. And that's why we're so very pleased to have such a big delegation out here this week. And this is one of our most successful visits anywhere in the world.
By when do you want to conclude these talks? Any deadlines?
No. Well, I understand the two leaders have set a deadline for Minister Goyal and I will be informed of that, and we do what our leaders tell us. But I think that it can be done within a reasonable period of time. We shouldn't drag our feet and take longer than we need to. We've agreed where there are issues to find solutions to them, not to keep negotiating the same point. I know the business community on both sides want us to do a very good job as quickly as possible so they can get on and do business with each other. But we need to take the time to get it right, because
so within a year or so?
Well, I don't want to put a time frame on it because media elsewhere will be counting down the clock. But we would like to get it done quickly, and a year or so may not be out of the question.
All right. I'd also like to ask you about digital payments. That was one of the areas that was mentioned in the joint statement. What are the two countries looking to do further in terms of cooperation on digital payments?
Yeah, we're going to advance that very quickly. We have the governor of our Reserve Bank here this week, and he's meeting with his counterparts on the Indian side. And I think there is a cooperation agreement that will say we're going to speed this up. And it's to allow digital payments more easily and more quickly between the two countries. But it could extend to the system you have for digital payments at the consumer level or retail to be available to New Zealand, and it can be adopted down there. And that just makes it easier when people travel, but actually it also makes it easier for New Zealand consumers. And so it's something that we want to look at. When Prime Minister Luxon says we want to deepen our relationship with India and make it a priority and broaden it, it's in all areas. They're talking about areas that we can cooperate around defence and security. We have a New Zealand naval ship here this week to mark the visit. There's been a naval ship from India has visited New Zealand. We want to explore areas, particularly around the Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific, where together we can work to make sure that for our citizens and for our traders, it is the safest part of the world for them to do business. And so from that to trade, to sport, to investment, to education, you will see us lifting our relationship significantly, starting with the announcement yesterday that we're going to increase our diplomatic footprint of India by 60%. So that's more people on the ground to help build the relationship and make sure that it continues to grow and flourish.
Right. What's your biggest worry in terms of the geopolitical situation with the new president in the White House? There is this looming threat of reciprocal tariffs that would come into effect on 2nd of April. We don't know exactly whether they'll come into effect on 2nd April or there will be a breathing room. But how do you see this impacting New Zealand? And in the current geopolitical context, when you've got two wars going on, how important does the India-New Zealand relationship begin?
Yeah, well, I mean, the President Trump campaigned on a tariff agenda, and so, I don't think anybody can be too surprised that he is delivering upon that. We are working through a process now of what it might mean for us. Our trade is very well balanced. It's more or less the same in both directions. In essence, US exporters to New Zealand face much lower tariff rates predominantly than we do going into that market, but it's complementary and we respect the rules, and so we're working through that. The one thing that I think this is doing for businesses and countries around the world is creating uncertainty, however, and in times of uncertainty, if a business can't be certain, they might not make that investment or they won't hire that extra person because they want to wait and see what's happening, and I certainly think we're going to see that for a period of time. But what it does mean is countries like New Zealand and India have to continue. Our businesses want to, keep growing. They want to have markets that they can trade into, and that's why at this time a high-quality comprehensive trade agreement between India and New Zealand, at least even just the announcement of us negotiating, sends a very clear signal to businesses in both countries that we are going to look at rules that they can rely upon and bring a degree of stability. That's the other reason we want to do the deal, as quickly as we can, although we've got to do a good deal. And if we look elsewhere, there has always been uncertainty around the world, and governments' jobs are to agree common sets of rules that are sensible, that can be relied upon, and then work to respect those rules, to create that certainty for the businesses. And I know with Minister Goyal, he and I agree on many things, domestically as well as multilaterally and in the WTO. We'll be able to do that, and our two leaders, our two Prime Ministers, have instructed us to. So we're going to be working as quickly as we can to deliver on their commitment for this high-quality agreement.
And finally, my final question, any possibility of any demand from your side to reduce non-tariff barriers?
Well, we've agreed previously on one of my earlier visits that we should look to reduce non-tariff barriers. In fact, I said to Minister Goyal, outside of a formal negotiation, there are many things we can do to make it easier for our two countries to trade more with each other, and we've already seen that. The agreement of how logs can now come in on the Indian side. We've been able to agree the importation of mangoes to New Zealand, and the people of New Zealand have the best mangoes in the supermarkets now, and they're happy and they don't even know why. And so we're committed to continuing to bring these barriers down. Where you need rules, of course we should have them. We need to protect each country against pest and disease and someone coming in, but we have agreed to find cost-effective, efficient ways to do that. I've invited Minister Goyal to send officials down so we can look at ways to change the system, and I've had officials up here. And we've said we want to create a system that sees those non-tariff barrier problems coming before they happen, so they can be fixed before anybody's affected, and we may not get the thanks of fixing them, but actually the business will be able to grow. And so non-tariff barriers certainly will be an area where we will have a very strong cooperation. Final point, and an example of this, is I've given a commitment that we'll go back and have a look at the recognition of standards around education and professional services in New Zealand. Can we have mutual recognition so that if, for instance, a doctor or a nurse trained in India wants to come to New Zealand, do they have to do a new degree, or is there a way just to recognise their qualification from the university in India? And I'm not responsible for that, that's someone else, but it is worth looking at because that will make it easier for those goods and those services to flow more freely. And so through the negotiation, we'll find many areas that we can work more closely together, and that can only be good for the citizens of India and of New Zealand.
Minister, thank you so much for talking about the India-New Zealand partnership and why it's important for our two countries in the current geopolitical context to work even more closely in the years to come. Thanks once again.
Thank you so much.